Hey, hello, friends, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Micadelic. I'm your host, Mike Brancatelli. Thank you for joining me today. And if you're new, thanks for checking the show out. We have a lot of different kinds of episodes here. Sometimes we have episodes with guests, sometimes just solo episodes of me ranting or maybe telling a story. I have a 4-part ayahuasca adventure story where I talk about the first time that I drank ayahuasca. That's back in the earlier episodes. But anyway, thank you. Thanks for choosing to listen. And if you are a listener regularly and you get value from this show, just talk about it. I think more than I talk about this all the time on the show, right? Like ways that you can support the show, like go to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. Make sure to click that 5-star review for Micadelic. Mike Brancatelli thanks you. Go to Patreon, patreon.com. That's www.patreon.com/MikeBrank, BRANC. You can support this show for as little as $1 a month. Thank you. Eat shit and die. No, you can support this show simply just by talking about this stuff. Seriously. I mean, there's sometimes I forget how out of the realm of the mainstream conversation that these topics are, and I get messages from you guys that listen to the show and tell me that your lives have been enriched from just having access to these kinds of conversations and these kinds of thoughts and ideas. And that goes and then that goes and spurs you on to communicate these ideas with your girlfriends or your wives or your significant others and your friends or family members, if that's the case. And that is really what it's all about. I mean, the spread and dissemination of information that's, that the things that we're talking about here on this show, to try and seep them into the public mind, to the public consciousness, to get these topics to be more accepted into the 3x5 card of allowable thought and opinion. And that's really what it is. I was recently, hanging out with some people. I found myself in a conversation where it just wasn't my conversation. It just wasn't a fit. I just couldn't really participate. There was nothing really available for me to kind of chime in and to say things. Although when asked upon what I was doing and, this sort of thing, I explained that I was going to be going to Peru and I was going to be taking part in ayahuasca ceremonies. And they were curious. What is that? I never heard of that before. I don't know what that is. So sometimes we take for granted because we who listen to the show, we're kind of in this world. But I talk about it very matter-of-factly, to my parents, to relatives, to friends. I just talk to them very matter-of-factly about what it is that this is all about. Because this is a significant part of the human experience. This is a part of the human experience that doesn't really, that gets kind of pushed under the rug, but doesn't deserve to be pushed under the rug, right? So I talk about it just in the same way that someone would talk about watching the football game. Oh, what was the score of the football game? I don't know. What was the score when you took 5 dried grams of mushrooms in silent darkness? You want to hear about that? But if, when people ask, I talk about it in a matter-of-fact, simple way. And if they have questions, I answer them. And I try and leave all of the, like, dude, like, you gotta try this, like, it's sick, like, like, I leave all that stuff out. I leave it all out. Because at the end of the day, you can't really force anybody onto psychedelics. You can't force anybody onto your way of thinking. You just have to sort of allow them to have the space to discover it themselves. So if you can kind of, someone once told me, this friend of mine told me that, it's difficult because you feel that you've just discovered something, right? Like when I first discovered psychedelics, like I was like, oh my God, like I need to tell everybody about this. I need to scream from the mountaintops. I need to just run up to every person and be like, do you have any idea what's going on here? Do you know what I just experienced? But you can't do that. You can't. And she was talking about it. She's like, imagine like, you ever see those guys on like the Venice Beach boardwalk and they have like a boombox and they're talking about like, Jesus is for you and you must accept the Lord, and they're like screaming and yelling at people and they're blasting it out of this boombox or with a megaphone or something. Yeah, that's not really appealing. No one's like, oh yeah, that sounds warm and inviting. That sounds right up, like I want to know more about this. No, we look at that person like they're crazy, and we ignore them, and it's irritating. It's very irritating to hear something like that. No matter if you think that you've, just discovered the lost city of Atlantis and you're running down the streets and you want to tell everyone about it, it's very hard to penetrate, it's a delicate kind of thing to do. So she said, when you're communicating these sorts of things, when we're talking about psychedelics and consciousness and just, communicating from a deeper understanding of love and compassion and, expanded an expanded realm of reality, talk about it like you're at a campfire and you're sharing a story. And it's like, hey, you can come over here and you can sit down and you can listen if you'd like, and we're just going to talk. And you can ask questions and I'll answer them, and that's it. And there's no force, there's no dogma, there's no, you got to believe this, you don't know what you're talking about. It's just, this is what it is from my point of view. And if you can kind of relate to that, if that seems like this is interesting to you, then we can go further along the path. But to force this kind of stuff on people is wrong, and not just wrong, but it's also just kind of annoying too, because not everybody wants to know about this, which is, it's very interesting because it seems to me right now that this kind of self-help, self-improvement category, I don't know if it's this time right now, but this is when I'm recognizing it, but it just seems like everywhere I look, from podcasters to authors to YouTube personalities to Instagram personalities, there's the daily quotes on Instagram, like, you can do it, like, the time is now. I have a couple thoughts about it. One is that it makes me understand that, or it leads me to understand that obviously people are looking for something. Obviously people feel like they have a void in themselves and that they need to fill it with something. They're looking for a way to improve. But maybe, I don't know if it's necessarily that they're looking for a way to improve so they can have more money or more success. It seems like a lot of the messaging is that way, right? Like 10 steps to financial health. You're going to want to tune in to this podcast when we tell you the 8 ways to improve your life today. Number 1, get up every morning at 6 a.m., do 100 push-ups. Number 2, read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal front to back. Number 3, sacrifice a goat. Like, I don't know. I mean, I for a while kind of was reading a lot of and listening to a lot of self-help kind of stuff, but I was trying to be very careful about where I got it from, because a lot of it is just bullshit. It's just, a lot of it is just fluff. It's just and you know what? It's not for you. Right? It's like everybody wants to be this like ultimate kind of version, like, okay, well, clearly the correct way to live is to wake up at 6 a.m. Okay, then you exercise, and then you meditate, and then you have a breakfast that's only consists of grass and air. It's like, no, everybody has a different physiology, everybody has a different human experience. So the way that works for you is the way that works for you. And I think a lot of people really try and push themselves, and they get disappointed when they can't live up to the the books like the 5-Second Rule, Mel Robbins, which is a good book, and and don't get me wrong, a lot of these self-help books have like one little nugget of wisdom that you can extract out of it or whatever, but there's so many of them out there, right? I mean, Tim Ferriss, like the 4-Hour Work Week, Tools of the Titans, like Tribe of Mentors. Yeah, who in their right mind is going to digest all of that stuff and follow every single thing to the T, right? I mean, we're not robots. We're human beings. We're fluid and we're different. We're unique, each one of us. And I think for someone like Tim Ferriss, he seems to be like a very and I got nothing against the guy really at all. I have a few of his books and I've taken some wisdom out of them, but I would never be able to live my life like Tim Ferriss. I just wouldn't. It just doesn't work for me. It doesn't make me feel good. And it's not like, he just seems, to me, he seems like one of these kinds of people that does everything for like maximum efficiency. I am the complete opposite of that. I am not efficient. And that's okay. So I think acceptance is something that needs to be preached in a lot of these things. And that's just not what we hear, right? I mean, you hear this stuff in the Catholic religion, right? It's the same thing. It's like something's wrong with you and you need to improve. You need to get to, you're born out of sin and you need to be better. Now, all these kinds of self-help stuff and new age stuff, it's like there's something wrong with you and you're not being efficient and you're not being productive and you're not hustling. 6 ways to hustle your way to success. Number 1, stop being so fucking lazy. Number 2, maybe being lazy is good for some people. In fact, actually, I read this book by Adam Grant, brilliant Adam Grant. I think he's a professor of business at Wharton. He's a brilliant guy, and he wrote a book called Originals. And he's talking about how creative minds come up with original ideas. And it might seem counterintuitive to a lot of like this kind of self-help crap and what we're being told, right? But a lot of his stuff is he explores. I remember a part of the book where he was exploring people who procrastinate. He's saying actually people who procrastinate come up with creative ideas because it's like the procrastination period is like a gestation period where you're kind of ruminating and pondering and wondering and taking apart things and analyzing them, and it's like it's just this machine that's just kind of running in the background while maybe you're doing other things, but the whole time you're kind of everything you look at, right? Like for this podcast, right? Like I might go a week and the whole time I'm thinking about the podcast, not thinking about the podcast intentionally, but the whole time I know that I'm going to be recording a podcast next week. So everything that I look at in the world, I look at with the context of how can I use this to a creative advantage? How can I maybe mold and shape this to fit my podcast? And that's what a lot of people do. Artists, writers look for inspiration in the world, and there's that kind of gestating period, what we call procrastination. And really, that's my whole beef with this whole self-help kind of motivation, inspiration, Instagram quote, get up and go, do it, 10 steps to do this, you're not going to believe what happened next, like 40-pound weight loss, this thing, that thing. It's like it all functions on the premise that you're not good enough and that other people are getting things and other people are happy and you're not happy and you're not good enough and you need to hustle and you need to work hard and you need to force yourself to fight against your physiology, fight against your biology, fight against your internal feelings, emotions, everything, and just go with this kind of, machine robot-like mode of efficient, productive hustling. Go, 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 do. Rise and grind, rise and grind. Sleep a little bit more, I think that's a big problem in our world is that the people are just on this treadmill and they just feel like it's never enough, and they're going and they're going and they're going, and it's never enough. You're enough. You're already enough. And, this kind of Western mentality of progress and innovation and achievement and, hustle is insane. There's great value in living fully now in the moment and just being. I mean, it's obviously cliche because a lot of people, say that, but I want to read a quote from Alan Watts. Alan Watts is a big inspiration of mine. If you don't know Alan Watts, please go find anything by Alan Watts. He's incredible. And he's a big inspiration of mine. When I started to kind of come online to a lot of this stuff, it was basically a combination of Alan Watts, Terrence McKenna, Graham Hancock, obviously, Joe Rogan and Dr. Christopher Ryan and Duncan. I would listen to those guys a lot. And so it was a combination of a lot of different people that I was listening to, and Dr. Gabor Mate. And so I'll read this quote from Alan Watts, and then I'll introduce the guest for today, because I didn't even talk about that yet. The guest for today is Kyle Thiermann. And Kyle Thiermann and I had a great conversation, and we're going to jump into that right away. Let me just read this Alan Watts quote, and then we'll get to that. So he's talking about sort of this meaning. People are struggling with a meaning in life, and I posted this to my Instagram. My Instagram is @Mikeadelic_podcast. And it says, so long as the mind is split, life is perpetual conflict, tension, frustration, and disillusion. Suffering is piled on suffering, fear on fear, and boredom on boredom. But the undivided mind is free from this tension of trying always to stand outside oneself and to be elsewhere than the here and now. Each moment is lived completely, and there is a sense thus of fulfillment and completeness. When you realize that you live in, that you indeed are this moment now and no other, that apart from this there is no past, there is no future, you must relax and taste the full, whether it be pleasure or pain. At once it becomes obvious why this universe exists, why conscious beings have been produced, why sensitive organs, why space, why time, why change. The whole problem of justifying nature, of trying to make life mean something in terms of its future, disappears utterly. Obviously, it all exists for this moment. For life is like a dance, and when you're dancing, you are not intent on getting somewhere. The meaning and purpose of dancing is the dance. And then he has another quote where he talks about how life is like music, and the meaning and the purpose of music is to listen to the music, not to get to the end. If it was to get to the end, people would show up to a concert for one big crashing grand finale and leave. He says, no, life is a musical thing, and the point is to dance. Now, I just love that Alan Watts quote, because it talks about so much. And he's great. So go look up his stuff. He's amazing. Alan Watts. He's not a self-help guru. He doesn't write books like Unfuck Yourself or 10 steps to business success or hustle hard, wake up, rise and grind, blah blah blah. It's a little bit deeper than that, folks. So check him out. Anyway, on to today's guest. Today's guest, Kyle Thiermann. He knows what it's like to live in the moment. He knows what it's like to take a slice out of life and enjoy the whole thing of it. I don't know what that is. You can tell I'm wearing thin on stuff to say. But anyway, Kyle Thiermann, he's a professional surfer, filmmaker, and podcaster. He hosts a show called The Kyle Thiermann Show. He's done work for the Discovery Digital Networks. He had a YouTube series called Surfing for Change. And we talk about all this kind of stuff. He gave a TED Talk in his wetsuit. So go check that out. I'll put all the links in the show notes here. His TED Talk was amazing, actually great. It was really great because he was addressing basically the power that banks have, right? I mean, here's like a surfer guy in a wetsuit talking about banking, right? But so important because it shows how everything is connected, right? So his program Surf for Change goes around the world looking at ways that they can improve environmental situations, and because there's a lot of pollution in places like, I watched one of his videos from Indonesia, all the kind of the garbage that is in the ocean and on the beaches and stuff. And so his video that he gave a TED Talk in his wetsuit, he was talking about how, he learned about, we get into this on the podcast, but I don't think I mentioned this part on the podcast. I didn't mention the fact that his video inspired people to move $360 million of money out of the centralized banks and into local banks and credit unions. That's amazing, right? I mean, I talk about this on the show all the time about localization and the power of localization. So yeah, we get into all that kind of stuff. He's gone all around the world. I mean, he's got an epic life, right? I mean, this guy is, and I'm, to a certain extent, I'm like a little jealous actually, because I'm jealous in his motivation. I wish I had more motivation, but hey, that's who I am, right? I'm a little bit lazier. I'm a little bit more of a procrastinator. One of the things I said, you'll notice in later on in the interview, he was talking. I'm like, yeah, he was telling me this story, and I just go, I'm like, oh wow, so you're traveling, you're surfing, you're doing the podcast, you're making videos, and I'm like, don't you ever have time to relax? And like, he's just like, yeah, dude, like, what do you mean? Like, all the time. Like, I love my life. My life is sick, you idiot. He didn't say that, but that's like, it was a stupid thing for me to say, because I'm like, here's someone who's actually living every moment of their life in the moment to the fullest, doing exactly what they want to be doing. To someone like me, I'm like, wow, that seems exhausting. I'm like, that seems like it's fucking, whew, I need to just chill out and watch, crush like, 4 hours of the Clone Wars on Netflix or something. But anyway, this is a great podcast. You guys are going to love it. Kyle Thiermann and me get right into it. And for about an hour, we talk about a lot of great things. Kyle tells a lot of great stories. Okay, without further ado, enjoy this podcast, guys. Kyle Thiermann.
Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open to us the possibility that everything we know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Or is it perception?
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity.
In a lot of different things. You wear many hats, as they say. So you have the podcast. You also do videos. Maybe you could tell people kind of what you do rather than me kind of stumbling around and addressing it for you.
Sure. Yeah, I always come up with a different answer when someone asks me what I do.
Cool.
Depending on the road that I want the conversation to take. I surf professionally. Patagonia is my main sponsor. I also am a documentary filmmaker. I travel around the world making short form documentaries on environmental and ocean issues. I also host a podcast where I sit down with big wave surfers, psychedelic explorers, sex therapists, and anyone else who I find interesting. So I kind of I wear many hats, and I would say that the theme of my life very much is curiosity, and whatever medium that takes form in, I tend to go for that.
Professional, curious, human. I like that. That's awesome, man. So what, out of all these things, what's currently kind of giving, interesting you the most? Is there one that really stands out more than the other ones, or are they all kind of grabbing your attention?
I think that it's less about what it is that I'm doing, whether it's making a documentary or making a podcast, and more it's the how am I doing it? I think that the question, what is it that you do, is it's such a shallow question. Not saying that it was a shallow question that you made, but it's just an easy question that we all ask each other, right?
Oh
it's
my
like,
God,
what do we do?
yeah,
And then we try and we try and brand each other very quickly.
We try and identify, make that like somebody's identity. It's like, what do you do? Oh, you're a car salesman. Boom. That's the limits have been imposed on you. Yeah.
Right. But you could be a sleazy car salesman, or you could be the best in the world, and you could be changing people's lives through your everyday decisions. So I think that, like, for me, I've been digging a lot recently into the why. Like, why is it that I'm doing all of these things that I'm doing? And I think that the reasons have changed dramatically since I started when I was 18 years old. That's when I first started traveling around the world making environmental documentaries and surfing professionally. And I think that at the beginning, a lot of it, the reason for that was to try and prove myself to my family, prove myself to my friends, and kind of came from like this place of like, I'm going to show you, like, what I'm going to show you, you're all wrong. And I think that as a result, I allowed my sense of worthiness to be externally located for quite some time. And I would say that it still kind of like wanes in and out of like my sense of okayness with myself. But the last number of years, I've been trying to ask my question, okay, why is it that I'm really doing this? Why is it that I'm really doing this? Because I know this is very kind of, we're getting deep real quickly.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, perfect.
I think that if we allow our sense of okayness with ourselves to be externally located, anyone can take that away from us. If I make a documentary about plastic pollution in Indonesia, for example, that was one doc that I did, and I'm constantly focused on what people think of it, what people think of me in a really fear-based way. All of a sudden, I feel like I'm standing on the tip of on the tightrope, and any little breeze can knock me off. And I know that psychedelics are a theme in your podcast, and I think that for that reason, psychedelics can be very helpful for people. I think that they can help people gain a sense of okayness with themselves, and it can shift their orientation towards why they do what they do.
Yeah, they can be great tools, definitely, and for sure, like they can be a catalyst to opening up to discovering your purpose, your why, your meaning, your mission, and that sort of thing. There's this great book by this guy Simon Sinek, I think his name is, called "Start with Why," and I read it like several years ago, and it really it's such a simple concept, and now that you bring that up, I mean, it really is important to find that why and kind of let that why be your anchor. And you mentioned psychedelics there, and of course, this is Mycadelic, and this is a psychedelic show, sort of, mostly, predominantly. Yeah, I mean, like just like you, I try and talk about whatever I'm interested in, and whatever I feel like talking about. I did like a Star Wars movie review the other day, so anything that captures my attention. But you did mention psychedelics, so let's jump into that realm right now. Um, what was your like first experience like, and was that like a catalyst for opening you up to step into the world of developing this larger mission of helping clean up plastic and the beaches and the oceans, surf for change, and all that kind of stuff?
It wasn't. I was interested in, I guess, quote unquote, like, world change work before psychedelics, but I think that they helped spur me along, and I think that like, yeah, obviously it's an intense. Like, psychedelics are an intensely personal they're intensely personal experiences for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what you get out of them is going to be different, and my experience with them is going to be different than someone else's. But I think that like it relates back to what you were just talking about Simon Sinek, who I'm familiar with starting with why, where it really can allow you to ask the questions of why are you doing what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I remember, for example, having a particularly profound experience on using LSD once, and I was in Big Sur, the top of this mountain. It was this really beautiful, clear day, and I was overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and the grass was green, and it was springtime, and the flowers were blooming, and I think that for a long time I thought that my purpose was to assert myself, and be a personality that was going to change people's opinions about any number of the issues that I had covered. And I think that came off in the documentaries that I was making. It was like this, I've been doing this kind of stuff again since I was 18 years old. I'm 27 now. So the way that I have learned to communicate has dramatically changed. And I remember I was standing up on this mountain looking over, thinking like, okay, what's my legacy going to be? What's my impact on the world going to be? And I had this experience, like many people do, when they're using psychedelics, of the realization of death, and the realization that I'm going to die, and everyone I know is going to die, and everyone they know is going to die, and I started asking the question, okay, what is my impact really going to be? And I came to the idea that really the only impact, and I'd say that the impact that I want to have is simply to be a conduit and to connect people with others, and that can actually be a really effective way to live our lives. And I think it's a much more graceful way to not try and be like, I was the guy who did this, I was the guy who did that. But and I remember I was looking out over the Pacific Ocean, and as many kind of fractal visions come into mind, I was thinking about, like, okay, let's say that I was able to connect someone with this group in Bali, who, this is a real group that I covered while doing a documentary on plastic pollution. They're working on liquid waste processing systems in Bali. Bali has a really bad trash epidemic.
Yeah, I saw that. It was like that was crazy. I watched that video, and there was like a picture of a wave with all this trash in it. I was like amazed at how much trash there was over there. Such a beautiful place. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that, like, so on that level, it's subtle, but it's like I realized, like, okay, well, maybe my place here isn't actually to be the guy who's like making the impact myself, but almost to get, like, allowing myself to get out of my own way and simply connect someone who might not be aware of this issue with other people who are doing this good work. Like, I firmly believe that the solutions of tomorrow are here today. They're just not evenly distributed. People just don't know about the solutions that are on hand.
Right.
And that was a shift that I think may not have happened without the help of psychedelics. And I think that also, another experience that a lot of people have on psychedelics is the death of the ego, right? It's the death of me, I'm so great. And I think that that can allow us to get out of our own way and ultimately be more effective in a more graceful way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Psychedelics they can definitely act as these kind of teachers that show you, show you things kind of in sometimes symbolic ways or something. It depends. I've had similar experiences where something will just come to me like an epiphany, or I'll be shown something in form of a metaphor, but definitely in a teaching kind of way. And like you said, a conduit. It's like, yeah, maybe certain people are just born to exist as conduits, to be sort of connectors, or that sort of thing. And you mentioned something. You said that it didn't you didn't sometimes the information is not available for people to know. I find that to be so fascinating, because I was watching your TED talk that you gave in your wetsuit I guess it was a couple of years ago, and you had said that you found out when you were in high school, you found out that these banks, that they lend the way that the banks work, right? That they lend the money out. If they don't actually just keep your money in there, that they lend it out. Now that's something that just came into your knowledge wheelhouse at that particular time in your life. It's kind of amazing. What if you hadn't learned that then? Or what if you had learned that earlier? And why aren't we learning things like this earlier?
Right.
It's very interesting. When
Yeah.
when these when this like knowledge comes in and kicks in. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for people who don't know what we're talking about with the banks, where you put your money in banks is probably one of the most impactful decisions that you can make on society and environment. Because when you put your money into a bank, it doesn't stay there. Your money is lent out, and it's actually lent out at many times your actual deposit. There's a law called fractional reserve lending, where when you put money into a bank, that bank is legally allowed to lend out around 9 times as much money. So if you put $100 into a bank, that bank is now using your money to lend out around $900, and that $900 might not be going to projects that you support, right? So if you have your money in a bank that's a local bank or credit union, chances are it's going to be circulating throughout your community and being lent to a local mom and pop shop, local business to help your community grow. However, there are Bank of America, for example. I'm not a big fan of them. Citigroup, Wells Fargo. These are some of the largest funders of coal power worldwide. They're kind of known for underwriting dirty energy projects, and your money inadvertently could be going to supporting these projects. So when I was a few years ago, I made a short documentary on the fact that Bank of America was allowing a proposed coal power plant down in southern Chile to move forward, and kind of drew that the disconnection between banking and the environmental world, and we were able to, with that project specifically, get at this point actually a couple $100 million of money moved out of Bank of America and into local banks and credit unions around the world. And that kind of spurred this series that I started called Surfing for Change, where the theme of it was I would go around the world and cover environmental and ocean issues through the lens of surfing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, that's one of those things that, yeah, they don't really come out and tell us, right? Like they don't really want that to be known. Otherwise, I think a lot of people would start changing their minds fairly quickly. So it kind of falls on you. Thank goodness you are doing this work, because then you're informing people, and by informing people, you're changing the consciousness of the population, where more people are aware and awake to what's actually happening. And they're asking that question, why? Why? There we go. We're circled back to the why. It's like, well, shit, why am I putting my money in this bank if they're doing this? Maybe I should do something else. Maybe I should look at alternatives. Hey, there's this thing called cryptocurrency. What the hell's that all about? Maybe that's better. Maybe that's going to be, maybe that'll be a total paradigm shift. But yeah, so it's amazing. I think it's super, super important to get out there and just be a communicator for this message. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I've been thinking about this concept recently. I'd like to hear what your thought is on it.
Sure.
Because we so often think about legacy. Everyone wants a legacy. What is my legacy going to be? What's the imprint that I'm going to have on other people? And so often our legacy isn't going to be what we think it is, because part of our legacy is the money that we spend at various businesses, where we put our money, the products that we come into contact with. I mean, ask anyone who's had a parent who's passed away, dealing with all of their stuff for the next few months has inadvertently become that person's legacy. So I've been thinking about the concept of treating everything that we own or come into contact with as part of the legacy that we will pass on, in kind of a roundabout and always and somewhat unconscious way. And obviously, it's impossible to have a purely benevolent legacy, and be only benevolent towards other humans. But I kind of like the way of like shifting that lens a little bit onto not our legacy, not just being the people that we impact, but also everything that we come into contact with, and all of the literal things that we're leaving behind.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's, I know my my parents had to deal with something like that. When my grandparents passed away, they had to deal with all this stuff that was left over, and it was just like it was such like a drain on them because there was so much stuff, and it was just, it was, I guess they were hoarders, it was like something like that. But I think a lot of people are, to a certain extent, we definitely use a lot of stuff and hold on to a lot of things. And I think this is actually getting back to what, you mentioned, you brought up death before, and man, I love talking about death. I think about death every day, and I know that might sound kind of weird, but it's just like, hey, we're all on death row. It's everyone has a sentence. There's, you're not really getting out of it. So, but with, we have this kind of mental hang up, because people they want to just hold on to stuff. Because they feel like maybe that they're defined by these things, or that they trigger certain kinds of nostalgic memories, and it's hard to part with those things. But really, I mean, when you look at the state of the world and the kind of situation that we find ourselves in at this current moment, with the amount of garbage and trash and just all this kind of wastefulness, it's pretty it's starting to be, it's far past detrimental. So yeah, I think. Yeah, definitely. Here I go off on a tangent, but yeah, I think that's definitely a good thing to think about.
Yeah, well, I think that it's interesting how death is the only inevitable thing that's coming for all of us, but how infrequently most of us encounter death,
Right.
and how healthy it can be to encounter death. I started bow hunting about a year and a half ago. I was so for a number of years, I worked as a correspondent for Discovery Digital Networks, covering ocean and environmental issues. And one of the stories that I covered was on this is going to be a roundabout story to death, but it was a story about the impact that wild pigs are having on Hawaii's coral reefs. So coral reefs are a living animal, and they need very clear water to survive. So muddy water blocks the ability for coral to photosynthesize, and it contributes to coral bleaching. Now, Hawaii has this huge wild pig problem. Wild pig they breed insane amounts. A single wild pig is sexually mature at 6 months old, and they can have up to 18 babies in a year.
Whoa.
And it just keeps going. So most states in the United States actually have a wild pig problem, and the impact that they're having on the coral is that they rummage around in watersheds, these sensitive watersheds in Hawaii, these really beautiful deep valleys that house a lot of native plants. And pigs are basically rototillers with hooves. So they will rummage around for grubs. And when the rains come, there's no soil retention. So when the rains come, it will create these huge mudslides, and then the mud plumes will cover the reefs. And it's a really big issue that oceanographers are having to deal with, and a lot of land-based conservation groups are now working to build fences around these watersheds and support hunting of the pigs because they're so detrimental to a completely separate ecosystem. So I thought that was kind of an interesting story, and I pitched it to Discovery. And we went over there, and we went on a wild pig hunt. And I didn't actually take the shot that time because I didn't know how to bow hunt, but I was really fascinated after I saw the whole process, and just the sobering experience of killing an animal and taking responsibility for it, and cleaning it and eating it. And just 2 weeks ago, I went on a hunt by myself, and I was out in the mountains, and I was walking down this ridge. Wild pigs tend to come out only during the first few hours of light and the last few hours before dark. The rest of the day, they basically bury themselves, and they're impossible to find. But I was coming down this ridge, and when you're hunting, you always want the wind at your face, because pigs don't have great eyesight, but they have really amazing senses of smell. So I was walking down and making sure that the wind was at my face, so the pigs couldn't smell me. And I had been practicing with my bow for the last year, and I saw these 5 pigs that were sitting in this orchard. So if I had gotten any closer, I was maybe 40 yards away from them, and they were behind trees, they would have seen me and ran away. So I decided to sit down, and I told myself, well, if one of these pigs comes up to me, or gets any closer, or I can get a good shot at it, then I'm going to take it. And if not, I'm not going to. So I sat there for about 20 minutes, and just creeped over this little ridgeline, so they couldn't see me, but I could see them and see where they were going. And one pig, a female, started making her way up the ridge towards me, and she was still behind a few trees, so I couldn't get a good shot at her. And sure enough, she made her way right outside of the tree and turned broadside, which means that they're facing, the side of them is facing you, and that's where you want to get there's a vital organ spot to hit it with a pig that's about a little smaller than a pie plate, because you want to hit them either in the heart or in the lungs.
Okay.
And she turned broadside, and I stood up and took an inhale, exhaled 70%, and let my bow fly and shot her. All the pigs ran, and the pig that I shot bolted away and only made it maybe 50 yards away. And I walked up to her, and she was underneath a tree, and she was taking her last few breaths, and I'd gotten a good shot and I'd gotten both of her lungs, and she was laying there, and I put my hand on her, and looked at her, and she looked at me and took her last few breaths, right there in that moment. And it was an experience that I hadn't had, that kind of personal and intense and almost psychedelic experience.
Yeah,
watching and taking that kind of responsibility, and just feeling responsibility for that, and feeling excitement and elation and sadness and grief and all of these emotions at once. But I felt everything in that moment that I needed to feel, and then took responsibility for it and cleaned the animal, and we used every part. And I've been thinking about that experience for the last few weeks, because I think that it's helped me just kind of come more to terms with death, like seeing that and experiencing that. And I think that it can it can be really healthy for us to have those kinds of experiences. I'm not saying that everyone should go out and hunt pigs, but I think that anything to promote transparency in this world, um, whether that's where the food that we come from, or the food that we eat, or um, the money that we spend in various banks, or the products that we use, the more that we can create transparency, the more ethically we can live. And I really do believe that that is an important step to changing the world.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, wow, that's just that's powerful stuff. I think I've never hunted before. Yeah, I've seen things. I've seen like animals die, but not from hunting. But yeah, it's when you're right there with it, it's you're like right in the whole mix of chaos and order and death and rebirth of the dance of all eternity of what this life is, and what it has been for so long too. I mean, let's not forget that this is a way that people used to, this is the only way that people used to get their food until now. We're all fat and happy, and we can sit back and we can go into grocery stores and we can just pick like the packaged thing that has like a picture of like a happy smiling cow on it and like a farmer, and or whatever. It's weird, like we've been so disconnected, and like desensitized and like kind of like numb for it. I think it's made a lot of people numb, and I think when that happens, you really rip people out of the state of being aware as to their why, to why they're doing what they're doing, and they're just kind of like going on autopilot, and don't think about death, don't think about this, just put your money here, pay your taxes, shut up, don't worry about it. And then here you are out in the woods with a fucking bow like Rambo, like, no man, I want to get back to the realness. It's getting back to what's really real, and what's more real than breath gasping, gnawing, clawing, biological sacks of meat running around, the dirt of the earth, and oozing blood out when we get hit. I mean, there's nothing more real. There's nothing more real than that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's incredible,
Yeah.
and here you are, actually solving a problem too, right? Because I mean, you're talking about these pigs being, they're wild pigs. So it's the whole relationship to predator and prey. I actually just saw this Facebook post. I don't know who posted, I forget, but someone posted something about these wolves that were reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park. The wolves were there, and then they took them out, and then the population of deer expanded. So the deer started like ruining everything. Like the when they removed like the alpha predators, everything changed, and the whole land area was changing. It was different, and the beavers weren't building dams, and there were less bees and there were less flowers because the deer were like stampeding over everything. So they reintroduced these wolves, they reintroduced the predators, and everything kind of it regenerated to the natural kind of balance of how it should be. It's quite an amazing thing.
It's called a tropic cascade, when you reintroduce
Yeah.
a top predator in, because what ended up happening in Yellowstone was, because the deer didn't have any top predators, they would hang out in the valleys, the watersheds, and they would erode the cliffs.
Right.
And when they reintroduced the wolves, clearly the wolves ate a few of the deer, but what happened was the deer's their movement patterns changed, because if you're a deer and you're watching out for a wolf, you're not going to hang out in the bottom of the valley. So then when the flowers started to bloom, because the soil retention was able to become better, it actually changed the course of the river, because then the beavers came back, and it's just a great example of when we try and outsmart nature, it never works, and when we mimic nature, it works beautifully. And I if I have a really good story about that if you'd like to hear.
Yeah.
I have some friends who are ecologists, and they're working on the salmon issue right now. salmon are becoming endangered in California, and they're a really badass animal. They swim up these rivers up in the Sacramento, from the ocean up to the Sacramento Delta, and they make baby salmon, and then the baby salmon swim down out of the rivers and go out to the ocean. They swim all around the entire ocean, then they'll come back to the exact same river the following year and come back up. But what the issue that these ecologists are having with the salmon is that a lot of the baby salmon don't survive until they make it to the ocean. So traditionally, the way that natural rivers flow is they meander. Very few rivers in their natural state just are deep and fast flowing and go quickly. They kind of snake around, and there are deep spots, there are shallow spots. And in the shallow spots of natural rivers, that's where a lot of the nutrients are. You can think about photosynthesis. A shallow river is going to have more algal bloom and more nutrients in these shallow areas, and that's where the salmon fatten up. But in the Sacramento Delta, it's become this kind of fast-flowing straight river that lacks in nutrients. So the ecologists are trying to figure out, okay, how can we fatten these baby salmon up so that they can have a better chance of survival out in the ocean and then making it back the next year. And there are rice fields on the sides of the Sacramento Delta that farmers will flood every year for their rice crops. And what the ecologists figured out is that they could just create these gates that the baby salmon could swim through from the Delta River onto the rice fields when the rice fields flooded, which are high nutrients than the baby salmon poop. It helps the rice grow. And they were able to fatten the salmon up to be 4 times the size of the salmon that didn't go on these floodplains to fatten up for short periods of time. The ecologists call them the floodplain fatties.
Wow.
And it was this example of us mimicking a natural system, mimicking a meandering river, with the modern systems that we have put in place to very effectively work to save a species. And I love those kinds of stories, and it gives me a ton of hope for the species that we have in trouble. We don't need to outsmart nature. We just need to pay more attention to it.
Yeah, totally. And we don't need to think about this way of kind of dominating and controlling and kind of molding everything to, have these, be in this human box that's, for our comfort and pleasure. It's I think mimicking is definitely the way to go. I recently just saw, there was, I'm sure you're aware of that there was this I forget his name. I think he's Dutch, and he founded a company called the Ocean Cleanup. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Is this the boy
He's like
in
a kid.
slot?
Yeah, that's his name.
Boy
Yeah,
in slot.
right. So I think I saw this video. He might have given like a talk like when he was a little bit younger, maybe 4 or 5 years ago or something. I remember being like, wow, that's a great idea. And then I kind of forgot about it. And so I think it turns out that they're actually starting to design these things and roll them out. And there's these like trash piles in the ocean that they're deploying them to. And the whole thing of it is it's this really simple system that mimics the way that plastic moves in the ocean, and it actually conforms to the waves, the natural wave patterns of the ocean. And it kind of, I don't know everything about it, but it sort of mimics the natural behavior of the ocean to collect the garbage. I thought it was pretty damn impressive.
I know quite a bit about it.
Oh, so, cool. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's why I have you on the show.
Sure. So there are actually not big piles of trash in the ocean. That stat that people talk about all the time, that there's this pile of trash twice the size of Texas out in the middle of the ocean, is a misconception. What people are talking about is the gyres. So
Hmm.
in our oceans, there are 5 gyres around the world. There are these massive currents in the middle of the ocean. The largest one is the North Pacific Gyre. So if you drop a plastic bottle off of California, for example, eventually it will end up in the North Pacific Gyre, this huge swirling toilet bowl that's much bigger than twice the size of Texas. So if you go out there, like one of these groups, one of them is known as the 5 Gyres. That's where the accumulation of plastic is, and it's I would liken it to plastic confetti,
Mm.
much less than an island. So they go in there with and to actually measure plastic content, and it's really frightening. I mean, the scientists project that by 2050, plastic will outweigh fish in the ocean. It's a very underexposed issue, and I think more people need to know about it. And what this kid Boyan Slot is doing is he's basically creating these, or the concept is to um, stop the plastic confetti and then take it in to recycle it. I have, and this is kind of controversial. I have issues with that as a solution because it actually takes the responsibility off of us.
Mm.
Like, for example, in LA, when smog was a huge issue in the 80s, there were all these grand ideas to solve the issue. One of them was to we're going to create these huge smog turbines, and it's going to suck the smog in, and it's going to save the day. What ended up helping with smog is smog checks. That every car has to get a smog check now. That helps reduce smog in LA. And I think that when there are these systems and systems that are still in concept, for example, I think that, like, look, if this kid pulls it off, fuck yeah, more power to him. But he hasn't, and the amount of media that he has received and what that does to people who don't know much about the issue tends to be, well, okay, this kid's figuring it out for me. The reality is that we all need to figure it out. And it's going to come down to individual decisions. It's going to come down to us not choosing to get a plastic bag or a plastic bottle. It's going to come down to us banning bags in our own communities. It's going to come down to us putting pressure on companies like McDonald's to not use polystyrene in their packaging. Because look, a lot of the countries around the world, besides America, are actually it's about what we do with the plastic, right? So, like, let's say this kid figures it out, we get all the plastic back on shore. What then? Like, very few plastic products can be made into the same plastic product. So what we're talking about when we're talking about recycling, many times we're talking about downcycling. We're talking about a bunch of plastic bottles being made into a picnic bench at your local park, or being made into some surfboard shorts. At the end of the day, it still ends up in the landfill at some point. So I think that the solution for us to really be thinking about, and kind of the paradigm that we need to be thinking about, is zero waste. I think that that's really the only way that we're going to be able to get out of this solution long term, is to think about systems that we can create where we are not just downcycling, but we are regenerating with the products that we use and the way that we live our lives. So I know that was kind of a long-winded way to say this kid's not just solving the problem for us, but I think it's more complicated than just saying, like, oh, he's got it handled for all of us.
No, well, I'm really glad you did say that, because as someone who isn't so familiar with the issues, I do look at that as an outsider and say, oh, wow, it looks like there's some real innovations happening here. And, living on one of the largest trash heaps in the world, that is New York City, it's hard for me to, I don't know. It's just, I'm not so exposed into that world, but you're right. You make such a good point, because, that is a common kind of, perception where, I was reading this book a little while ago called The Quest for Community. And it's all about how the community is very important, local kind of civic engagement, townships having sort of lodges and clubs and ways for people to get involved and be a part of their community, and that how that's kind of gone away with the rise of kind of a larger centralized government, whereas because these things are people just assume, well, somebody's taking care of it. Where's my tax dollars going? Well, they're going somewhere. Someone's doing something with it, so I don't need to get involved because it's being taken care of somehow. But that's not necessarily the case, right? I mean, that's
yeah, it rarely is, and I would liken the idea that is so prolific that technology will save us.
Mm.
I would liken it to a religion.
Right.
In some ways, it's like, it's okay, it's this external thing that's beyond my knowledge and beyond my control that's going to one day save us all. And like when I look at the solutions that are actually being implemented right now, when I go and I make a film on the people that are doing the good work, in Bali or in Chile or any one of these countries that I visited, it's people who are on the ground in the trenches making shit happen. I don't try and save the world. Or don't try and change the world. Try and change your neighborhood. It's people who are trying to change their neighborhood, and they're engaged with a small group of citizens that are actually making the difference. It's not the ones who think that some big fancy external solution is going to come down from the top and save us all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, right. And then, if you do think that way, banking on technology, or even, even currently right now, I know a lot of people, I know a couple of people who are, currently taking medication, Zoloft, these sorts of things, other sorts of things, medication. Whereas I'm kind of a big believer in maybe, I mean, it's not so much of a belief. I'm pretty sure it's objectively true in a lot of these cases where, look, maybe if you change your lifestyle a little bit, maybe if you ate a little healthier, maybe if you went outside and had some exposure to the sun, maybe if you took some cold showers and did some push-ups and, had some fruit every once in a while, instead of just, no, I'm going to continue with the lifestyle that I'm leading that's actually killing me, and I'm just going to take this pill to kind of cover it up. So that it's really, I think that's really something that is like in the predominant narrative for the mainstream consciousness of America, especially for America. A lot of people still inhabit that kind of space of that way of thinking.
Yeah, it's a very fractured way of looking at things. It's like saying, well, I have this broken leg, but I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to work on my biceps right now. I'm going to get some great fucking biceps. You should check these biceps out. Girls are going to love them.
Welcome to the gun show.
Welcome to the gun show. You got tickets? And I think that's the issue, right? There's not one silver bullet issue. We got to look at it as a system. We are a system. The world is a system. And I think that the more that we can look and take systematic approaches to our solutions, and once again, by just noticing nature more, they're right there at our fingertips.
Yeah. Amen. I mean, I'm totally in agreement with you on that for sure. So what's currently occupying your time right now, Kyle? What are you feeling most passionate about in terms of maybe projects that you have coming up, or things that you're thinking about, maybe things that you've read or watched recently that have got you thinking? Anything tickling your brain?
I watched a really good documentary recently called The Internet's Own Boy. It's a story of a kid named Aaron Swartz, who was the co-founder of Reddit. And he was a really brilliant internet activist, and it's a well-told story. He was one of the main guys who was responsible for stopping SOPA, which was the Stop Online Piracy Act, which happened, I believe it was back in 2013. It was one of the most underexposed internet success stories of our time. I don't want to give too much away, but it's a really good doc, so I recommend checking that out. I also just saw a really good doc called Jim and Andy.
Oh my God, yeah, I just saw that too. Yeah,
about Jim Carrey playing Andy Kaufman in the movie Man on the Moon. fantastic. I really recommend that. And yeah, other than that, I have a few. I was just down in Chile writing a story about a really exciting land conservation success at this wave called Punta de Lobos. It's one of Chile's most well-known waves. It's this really beautiful left-hand point break. The waves go for over 300 yards. It's overlooked by this cliff that has blooming yellow wildflowers and still largely undeveloped horse stables, and it looks like it looked a few hundred years ago. And a group of people came together and they decided that they were going to buy it and turn it into a land trust and protect it forever. There was a hotel bid to build this huge multi-story building on the property, and it was a guy who was a local professional surfer named Ramon Navarro teaming up with a group of people, as well as this wealthy guy from Santiago, to raise money. They raised $900,000 together, and they bought this property and now are turning it into this education center. And it was a really inspiring success story that I was able to go down and document in a time when land conservation issues are kind of at the forefront of people's consciousness in America. It was a really cool model. Also, I won't give too much away on that either, but I think the story is going to be out next month. So
Cool.
I'm working on that. And yeah, man, never a dull moment. Just,
Yeah, really.
as
Never adult. So you're traveling around, you're making documentaries, you're doing podcasts. You have the activism thing going on and the surfing, of course. So what do you ever have like just downtime just to like take a breath?
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty darn good life, man. I mean, I get to do what I love, and get paid to learn about shit and figure out interesting ways to explain it to people.
Yeah.
So I would say that I have a pretty good tempo on, when I feel like I'm pushing it a little too hard and I'm going to burn out, and when I need some downtime. But
So you're going
man,
you're going at your own
another.
speed. You're your own boss.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I can. Another book that I want to recommend, and you might know this book already, but I think your audience would really enjoy it. It's called The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide by a guy named Dr. Jim Fadiman. I've had him on my podcast twice, and he's considered one of the foremost researchers in safe and therapeutic uses of psychedelics. I'm all for safety if people are going to start using psychedelics, because they are powerful, and they should be taken with reverence. And I was actually rereading the book tonight, and I read a really amazing story in it about how psychedelics were responsible for the environmental movement. And it's a story about a guy named Stuart Brand, who was sitting on the top of a building in San Francisco, looking out at the Pacific Ocean, and he took 100 micrograms of LSD. And he was staring at the ocean. He was looking at the curvature of the Earth, and the curvature of the ocean, vast ocean, going down. And he was thinking about the fact that around that time, Buckminster Fuller had been going on and on about how all of the issues of the world were rooted in the fact that we thought that the Earth was infinite. We thought that it just went on and we could do whatever we wanted to it, and it wouldn't make a difference. So Stuart Brand was sitting up there, and the LSD started kicking in, and he thought to himself, why haven't we seen a photo of the whole Earth? This is a time when satellites were orbiting the Earth, but there had not been a photo of the whole Earth released to the public. So the very next day, when he was done with his trip, he went to to Berkeley, and he put up a sign and made buttons that said, "Why haven't we seen a photo of the whole Earth?" He started passing the pins out to students. One of the campus officers kicked him off. The local paper reported on the story, and he had his platform. He then went around to MIT and Harvard and created a bit of a movement with these pins and bumper stickers saying, "Why haven't we seen a photo of the whole Earth?" And a couple years later, NASA released the first photo of the whole Earth. It's that famous photo of the Earth suspended in space, and all of a sudden, all of the humans could see the greens and browns of the continents and the blues of the ocean, and we had a way to look at ourselves from a whole new perspective. And that year, the Stuart Brand created the Whole Earth catalog, which largely spurred the '60s environmental movement. And I believe it was the very next year was the first Earth Day in April, and that then I think that single photo allowed humans to interact with the Earth in a completely new way because we had a new perspective, and that might have not happened had he not taken 100 micrograms of LSD on the top of that San Francisco roof.
Oh yeah, man. What a good story. Yeah, Stuart Brand, the Whole Earth catalog. I remember Steve Jobs talking about that and how much of an impact it had on him. And Steve Jobs kind of stole his line from the last printing of the Whole Earth catalog and gave it in his commencement speech at Stanford, where Stuart Brand signed off his last episode, or not episode, I'm thinking in podcast terms, his last publishing of the magazine. He said, "Stay hungry, stay foolish," kind of keep that kind of foolish curiosity of the child and look at things from that kind of mindset, and stay hungry, stay motivated for change. What a beautiful invention, to come about. And yeah, why, I thought you were going to say, why haven't we seen a picture of the whole Earth? Well, because it's flat. That's why. And I'm a flat earther, and I'm like, big revelation in the show. Kyle Thiermann's a flat earther. No,
that's for round two. Round two, we can talk about flat Earth.
Yeah, but no, I mean,
the Earth is round, everyone.
It's very round, and it's profound. That was a great story, and I'm glad you shared that, because it is such, kind of, maybe this is, circling back to kind of where we started the show, talking about the meaning and why and everything, and it's really getting that perspective, gaining that perspective, something that you've never had before in your life. I think it was it's called the overview. The overview effect is this like cognitive shift in awareness that's reported by astronauts when they go into space and they see the Earth in orbit from wherever they are in the space station or whatever, when you get up to that point, and then the ability to share that then with the public, that overview effect. It's like, oh my God, like this is our home. This is where we are. We're looking right at it. There's that pale blue dot, that rock floating in the middle of nowhere. Everything that's happening is happening here when you're throwing junk out and it's getting in the ocean or whatever, you're doing it to yourself. You're doing it to your home, right? I mean, it really comes into it. I know it kind of, it's a little hacky to say that, but it comes really full, into your full being. At least it does for me when you experience something like that. So thanks for sharing that story. That was cool.
Yeah, man. Well, look, we need nature to thrive, and a lot of those life-changing insights that we have into our own lives tend to happen in nature. So I think that it's only natural that we do everything we can to protect it.
Awesome. Yep. Well said. Kyle, thanks so much for being on this show. Do you want to tell people where they can go and find you and follow up on your stuff?
Sure, man. My website is kyle.surf, not kyle.surf.com, just kyle.surf. I do a monthly email where I tell people about the best books I've been reading, documentaries I've been watching, everything and anything. Do a podcast, make documentaries. I'm on Instagram. They'll find me however they want to find me.
Awesome. Can I ask you one last question before we totally wrap? What would you say to people out there that are listening that want to get involved and are doing, that maybe look at what you're doing and say, hey, I want to do something like that. Where do they start? How do they get moving on this kind of stuff?
Well, man, I think that the best decision I've ever made in my life has been to surround myself with really good people, smart people, people who inspire me, people who have skills that I want to learn. Tim Ferriss has a great quote. He says, "You're the median of the 5 people you surround yourself with most." So whatever it is that you want to get involved with, surround yourself with those 5 people.
Excellent. Thanks again, Kyle.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Till next time. Peace. I hope you guys enjoyed that podcast as much as I did. You know what to do if you love this show. Share it, like it, spread it with your friends. Tell a friend, tell a family member, tell a neighbor, tell a coworker. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/MikeBrank. You can donate as little as $1 a month. Or you could go on iTunes and leave me a nice 5-star rating and review. Whatever you do, thank you for listening. Much love to you all. Peace.